Here's a thrilling story filled with betrayal, intrigue, redemption, and unexpected twists. Caught my wife cheating, moved on, and found new love. Until my ex tried. Chapter 1. The shattered illusion. Ethan Parker had always believed in loyalty. He and Olivia had been married for 8 years, and despite the ups and downs, he never imagined betrayal lurking in the shadows of their home. But illusions have a way of shattering at the worst possible moment. It was a Wednesday night when Ethan's world unraveled. Returning home early from a business trip, he found Olivia entangled in another man's arms, someone he recognized, his so-called best friend, Jordan. The betrayal burned hotter than any fire. Olivia's eyes widened in horror when she saw him. Jordan scrambled for his clothes, stammering apologies that meant nothing. And Ethan? He felt nothing but cold, calculated. "Calm. You've already packed your bags, Olivia," Ethan said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You just don't know it yet." She sobbed, begged, but he wasn't the man to be deceived twice. The divorce was swift, merciless. Olivia moved out, Jordan vanished, and Ethan? He walked away from the wreckage, promising himself he'd never look back. Chapter 2. A New Beginning. Healing wasn't easy, but time has a way of stitching wounds closed. A year passed, and Ethan rebuilt himself. He left behind the house that held memories of betrayal and moved to a new city, starting fresh. That was when he met Lena Carter. Lena was different, smart, witty, and with a fire in her that intrigued Ethan from the start. She owned a cozy little bookstore, and their first conversation had been about old detective novels. Their second was over coffee. Their third was a dinner that lasted until midnight. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt something real. They fell into something effortless, something he didn't realize he had been missing. Lena wasn't just a distraction. She was a chance at something better. And then Olivia came back. Chapter 3. The ghost of the past. It started with a message. "Ethan, we need to talk, please." He ignored it. Then came the second, and the third, and then a message from Lena. Olivia had come to her bookstore. "She said she wanted to talk to me about you," Lena said, her voice calm but cautious. "I told her I wasn't interested. That should have been the end of it." But Olivia was never one to take no for an answer. Days later, Ethan found her waiting by his car. She looked different. Not desperate, not remorseful, calculated. "I made a mistake," Olivia said, her voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "I want to fix it." Ethan let out a laugh, short, bitter. That's the thing about mistakes, they can't be undone. But Olivia wasn't here for apologies. She leaned in, lowering her voice. "She's hiding something from you, Ethan. You don't know her like I do." And just like that, she left, planting a seed of doubt that Ethan couldn't quite shake. Chapter 4. Unraveling Secrets. Ethan trusted Lena. But trust is a fragile thing, especially when doubt slithers in like poison. He started looking. Not because he wanted to believe Olivia, but because something about the way she said it felt like a warning. Lena had moved to this city only a few months before he did. Her past was clean, too clean. No digital footprint, no old photos. She had a brother, but no mention of her parents. And then he found the news article. Eleanor Carter, missing since 2019. Family suspects foul play. Eleanor. Lena Carter. The resemblance was striking. Too striking. Who was she really? Chapter 5. The trap. Ethan didn't confront Lena outright. He needed answers first. He followed her one night when she said she was meeting a supplier. Instead, she drove to a quiet neighborhood, parked outside a house, and sat there, just watching. The next day, he went to that house, knocked on the door. An older woman answered. "Can I help you?" she asked. I'm looking for Eleanor Carter." The woman's face went pale. Her grip on the door tightened. "Who are you?" "Ethan Parker. I just need to know the truth." The woman hesitated, then whispered, "She's not who you think she is." His blood ran cold. That night, Ethan returned home, only to find Lena waiting. In her hand, she held the same news article he had found. "You've been digging," she said, her voice eerily calm. "So have you," Ethan shot back. "Who are you, Lena?" Silence stretched between them before she finally spoke. "My real name is Eleanor, and the woman who claims to be my mother, she's the one who tried to kill me." Chapter 6. The final twist. Eleanor had faked her identity to escape a dangerous past. Her family wasn't what they seemed. She had uncovered something dark about them, something that put her life in danger. She thought she had finally outrun them. But Olivia's meddling had drawn unwanted attention. Someone had followed Ethan to that house, someone who wanted Eleanor to stay buried. That night, a car followed them home. Chapter 7. Ghosts never stay. Buried, Ethan and Eleanor thought it was over. They thought the danger had passed, that the men in the shadows were gone. But the past doesn't die so easily. It lingers, waiting for the right moment to claw its way back at E. 2 months had passed since the attack. They had moved again, new city, new names. Eleanor was now Lena Carter Parker, and Ethan had left his old life behind. One night, as they sat on the balcony of their new apartment, drinking wine and pretending they were normal people with normal lives, Ethan's phone buzzed. No number, no name. Just a message. "You should have stayed buried, Eleanor." His blood ran cold. Eleanor saw the message, her fingers gripping the wine glass too tight. The way her breath hitched told Ethan one thing. She recognized the sender. "Who is it?" he asked. Eleanor hesitated. Then she whispered a name. "My brother." Chapter 8. The Brother in the Shadows. Ethan had never heard much about Eleanor's brother, only that they were estranged. But if she had been running from someone, why hadn't she mentioned him before? "You told me your family was dangerous," Ethan said, watching her carefully. "You never said anything about a brother." Eleanor set the glass down. Her hands were shaking. "I thought he was dead," she admitted. "I thought I was the only one left." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Then why is he texting me?" She exhaled, long and slow, her eyes darting toward the city skyline as if searching for an answer. "Because he wants something," she said. "And I have a feeling it's not just revenge." Chapter 9. The Meeting. The next message came 2 days later. "Meet me at 11 p.m. No cops, no tricks, just answers." Ethan wanted to ignore it. But Eleanor, she couldn't. "I need to know," she said. "I need to see if he's really alive." So they went. The meeting spot was an old abandoned train station on the outskirts of town. The kind of place where deals were made and bodies were never found. A single figure stood beneath a flickering streetlight. He wore a hood, his hands in his pockets. "Eleanor," the man said. His voice was deeper than she remembered, roughened by time. Ethan stepped closer, instinctively positioning himself between them. "Who the hell are you?" The man pulled back his hood, dark eyes, a scar across his jaw. "My name is Daniel Carter," he said, "and I know why they tried to kill her." Eleanor froze. "Who?" Daniel exhaled, shaking his head. "The people you ran from. The people Mom and Dad worked for. They weren't just criminals, Eleanor. They were government. And you? You saw something you weren't supposed to." Chapter 10. The Truth. No one was meant to know. It all came rushing back. The night Eleanor first ran. The night she thought her parents were dead. The night she saw the files. Their parents weren't just criminals. They were operatives. They had been part of something bigger, something deeper. And Eleanor had uncovered a list. Names, transactions, secrets that could burn governments to the ground. She hadn't just been running from family. She had been running from an entire system designed to erase her. "You stole something," Daniel said. "Something valuable. And they want it back." Ethan looked at Eleanor, realization dawning in his eyes. "The files. Where are they?" Eleanor swallowed. "I don't know." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Then they'll keep coming." A sound echoed through the station. Footsteps, more than one. Ethan turned. Dark silhouettes moved through the shadows. Guns. Precision. The past hadn't just come knocking. It had kicked the door down, and now the only way out was to run, to be continued. "Do you want me to keep going? I can dive deeper into the conspiracy, the chase, and the final showdown. Let me know how intense you want it." Chapter 15. The Man Behind the Door. The room was silent except for the knocking. Slow, methodical. A hunter toying with its prey. Ethan exchanged a glance with Daniel, who had already drawn his pistol. Eleanor's breathing was steady, but Ethan could see it. The flicker of fear in her eyes. Another knock, then the voice again. Calm, controlled. "I know you're in there. Let's not make this messier than it needs to be." Ethan's pulse quickened. They were out of time. Daniel moved. First, silent as a shadow, signaling toward the back exit. But before anyone could move, bang! The door exploded inward. A flash grenade rolled inside, detonating with a concussive blast of white light and sound. Ethan's world tilted. His ears rang. The room spun. Then hands grabbed him, yanking him forward. He caught a glimpse of Eleanor, staggering but still moving, before a boot slammed into his ribs, knocking him to the floor, and then, through the haze, he heard the voice again. "Hello, Eleanor. It's been a long time." Chapter 16. The phantom of Perseus, Ethan fought through the dizziness, forcing his vision to focus. The man standing over them was tall, lean, dangerous, dark suit, dark gloves, and a scar that ran from his temple to his jawline. His eyes were ice, cold, predatory. Eleanor's voice was steady, but Ethan could hear the steel beneath it. "Lucian." The man, Lucian, smirked. "I was beginning to think you'd actually gotten away." Ethan's mind raced. Lucian. The name wasn't just a name. It was a ghost story in intelligence circles, the fixer of Perseus, the one they sent when someone needed to disappear. Daniel pushed himself up, breathing hard. "I thought you were dead." Lucian's smirk widened. "You thought wrong." He turned back to Eleanor, tilting his head. "You have something that doesn't belong to you." Eleanor didn't blink. "And if I don't?" Lucian stepped closer. "Then we start removing pieces of your new boyfriend until you change your mind." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Try it." Lucian sighed, almost bored. "Always the tough ones." He glanced at his men. "Take them." Then the gunfire started. Chapter 17. The escaped Daniel moved first. One fluid motion, grabbing his pistol and firing. Headshot. The nearest operative crumpled. Ethan tackled another, wrenching the man's gun away and firing point blank. "Eleanor! Eleanor!" Had a knife. Ethan had never seen her move like that. She pivoted, slicing across an attacker's arm, then driving the blade into his side. Chaos. Gunfire. Shouting. Lucian snarled, dodging back. "Enough!" He grabbed a fallen operative's pistol and aimed directly at Eleanor. Bang! Ethan fired first. The bullet tore through Lucian's shoulder. He staggered back, cursing, blood blooming across his suit. Daniel grabbed Eleanor. "Move!" They didn't stop running. Out the back, into the alley, gone before Lucian could recover. But as they disappeared into the night, Ethan knew one thing for certain. Lucian wasn't dead. And this wasn't over. Chapter 18. The last piece of the puzzle. They didn't stop running until they reached an old safe house Daniel had set up years ago. Eleanor was pacing, adrenaline still in her veins. Ethan turned to Daniel. "Where are the files?" Daniel exhaled. "They're buried in a vault, upstate. We can get them, but—" Eleanor shook her head. "Lucian won't stop." Ethan nodded. "Then we need a way to end this. For good." Daniel hesitated. "There's only one way." Eleanor stiffened. "No." Ethan looked between them. "What?" Daniel's expression was grim. "We don't just retrieve the files. We release them." Silence. Eleanor's fists clenched. "If we do that?" "Perseus burns," Daniel said. "Every name, every operation exposed." Ethan met Eleanor's gaze. "And that's what you're afraid of, isn't it?" She didn't speak. And that was when Ethan realized there was a name in those files that she didn't want the world to see. Chapter 19. The name that could change. Everything Ethan's mind worked fast. She wasn't just scared of Perseus coming after her, she was scared of who was in those files. He stepped forward. "Eleanor, who's in there?" She looked away. Daniel's expression darkened. "Eleanor," and then she whispered the name. The name that made Daniel pale, the name that made Ethan's stomach drop, the name that changed everything. The president, to be continued. This rabbit hole just got deeper. Want more conspiracy? A showdown with Lucien? A world-shattering leak? Let me know how high you want the stakes. Chapter 20. The name that could topple a nation's silence choked the room. Ethan's mind reeled. The president, the most powerful man in the country, maybe the world, was in those files. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Tell me you're joking." Eleanor didn't blink. "I wish I was." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "How? What does he have to do with Perseus?" Eleanor's voice was quiet. "He wasn't always the president. Before that, he was just a name on a list, a senator making deals in the dark. Perseus didn't just work with powerful people. They built them. They made sure the right people won elections, silenced the ones who got in the way." Daniel swore under his breath. "If this gets out, we're talking about a global firestorm. Governments will collapse. People will die." Ethan met Eleanor's gaze. "Is that why you never released the files?" Her expression was haunted. "I wanted to. I really did. But once I saw his name, I knew there's no safe way to do this. If we leak it, we die. If we run, we die." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then we don't leak it." Ethan frowned. "Then what do we do?" Daniel looked at Eleanor. "We use it." Chapter 21. Bargaining with the devil, it was insanity. A suicide mission. But it was the only play they had left. They needed someone who could act as a broker, someone who had power but wasn't directly tied to Perseus. There was only one name on that list: Victor Calloway, the man who built Perseus, the man they had betrayed. Daniel made the call. No names, just a time and place, midnight. An abandoned observatory outside the city. The message was clear. "We have something you want. Come alone." And he did. Chapter 22. The Kingmaker. Returns victor. Calloway stepped out of the black SUV like he had never left the game. Silver hair, sharp eyes, a presence that demanded attention. Ethan had expected someone older, weaker, but Calloway was still every inch the power player. He looked at Eleanor first. "You've been a very difficult woman to find." Eleanor's voice was calm. "I learned from the best." Calloway smirked. Then his gaze flicked to Daniel. Still. "Alive, I see." Daniel didn't smile. "For now." Calloway exhaled. "So, You have the files. Ethan cut in. We have the key to destroying Perseus, but we're not here to burn it down. Calloway studied him. Then why are you here? Eleanor stepped forward. We want out, for good, and we want Lucien off our backs. Calloway chuckled. Lucien isn't a man you simply get rid of. Daniel's voice was ice. Then find a way. Calloway considered them. Then he smiled, a slow, knowing smile. You have no idea what kind of war you're about to start. Ethan didn't blink. We're already in it. Calloway nodded. Then he extended a hand. Then let's make a deal. Chapter 23. A trap, set in shadows. The plan was simple, too simple. Calloway would use his remaining influence to leak just enough information to force Perseus into the light, not enough to bring them down, but enough to shift the balance of power. In exchange, he would give Eleanor and Ethan new identities, new lives, clean slates, but Ethan didn't trust him. You're playing both sides, he said, as they walked back to the car. Aren't you? Calloway smiled. Of course. That's what I do. Eleanor shook her head. And what happens to Lucien? Calloway's smile didn't fade. Oh, you'll see soon enough. Chapter 24. The Final Hunt. Begins. Ethan didn't sleep that night. Neither did Eleanor. They both knew. This wasn't over. The files were still out there. The president was still in power. And Lucien was still hunting them. At 3 a.m., Ethan's phone buzzed. No number, no name, just a message. You should have killed me when you had the chance. Ethan swallowed hard, because he knew, deep down, Lucien wasn't just coming back, he was coming for blood. To be continued. We're closing in on the final showdown. Do you want a brutal, action-packed conclusion, or a more intricate game of manipulation and power? Let me know how you want. This to end. Chapter 25. The Blood Oath. The text on Ethan's phone was a declaration, a promise. Lucien was coming. Ethan sat on the edge of the motel bed, running a hand down his face. Across the room, Eleanor was already slipping a gun into her waistband. She met his gaze. You know what this means? He nodded. He won't stop. Daniel exhaled, leaning against the wall. Then we finish this. We set the trap. Ethan frowned. You think Calloway will hold up his end? Daniel smirked. He will. Not because he wants to, because he needs us alive long enough to serve his own interests. Eleanor checked the magazine of her pistol. Then let's make sure we don't give him a reason to cut us loose. They had one chance, one move left on the board. Lure Lucien out and end it. Chapter 26. The bait. Calloway made the call. A whisper in the right ears. A carefully placed leak. The kind of rumor that would ripple through the underground like a knife through silk. The files had surfaced, and Lucien took the bait. The meeting was set for midnight. An abandoned airstrip outside. The city, a place where no one could hear the gunshots. Ethan could feel it in his bones. This was the end game. Chapter 27. The Devil Walks at Midnight. The night was thick with fog as they arrived. The airstrip was nothing but cracked pavement and rusted hangars. Perfect for an ambush. Ethan stood in the open, his gun hidden beneath his jacket. Eleanor was by his side, steel in her gaze. Daniel lingered in the shadows, rifle ready. Then the headlights appeared, a convoy of black SUVs, their engines rumbling like distant thunder. The lead car stopped. The back door opened, and Lucien stepped out. His suit was immaculate. The bloodstain from their last encounter was gone. His expression, calm, controlled. But his eyes burned with something else. Hatred. He took a step forward. You've been very, very busy. Ethan didn't move. You shouldn't have come. Lucien smirked. You think you're the one calling the shots here? Eleanor's voice was cold. You're outnumbered, Lucien chuckled. Am I? A flick of his wrist. Snipers, positioned in the distance, hidden, waiting. Ethan's blood ran cold. They had walked straight into it. Lucien smiled. Now, where are my files? Ethan exhaled slowly. Then, without a word, he dropped his gun. Chapter 28. The long game. Lucien raised an eyebrow. Surrendering so soon? Ethan smirked. Not quite. Then the world exploded. A gunshot. A silenced scream. One of Lucien's snipers dropped. Then another. Lucien's men spun, guns raised, but the shadows were already moving. Calloway's operatives, ghosts, killers, the ones he had been saving for just this moment. Ethan lunged, grabbing Lucien's arm as the first shots rang out. A struggle. A knife, flashing in the moonlight. Lucien was fast, too fast, but this time Ethan was ready. A brutal punch to the ribs, a knee to the jaw. Lucien staggered back, but grinned through bloody teeth. You're good, he rasped, but not good enough. A knife, slashing toward Ethan's throat. A gunshot. Lucien gasped. He looked down, blood bloomed across his chest. Eleanor stood behind him, gun smoking. Lucien chuckled, a wet, broken sound. He looked at Eleanor, then at Ethan. You should have done this sooner. He collapsed, and just like that, the ghost of Perseus was gone. Chapter 29. The last loose end. The fight was over in minutes. Calloway's men finished off the remaining operatives. The bodies were disposed of, the blood washed away by the rain that started falling. Ethan exhaled. It's done. Calloway stepped forward, hands in his pockets. He looked down at Lucien's body, then at Eleanor. You finally pulled the trigger, he mused. Did it feel good? Eleanor's expression didn't change. It felt necessary. Calloway smirked. Spoken like a true survivor. Daniel crossed his arms. We held up our end. Now it's your turn. Calloway nodded. Your new identities are waiting. Clean records, no past. He turned to Eleanor. And as for the files... Eleanor hesitated. Then she reached into her pocket and handed him the drive. Ethan tensed. Are you sure? Eleanor met his gaze. If we release them, the world burns. If we keep them, we stay hunted. But if we give them to him... Calloway smiled. Then Perseus remains in check. Controlled. Where it belongs. Ethan exhaled. So it all stays in the shadows. Calloway nodded. Like it always has. Eleanor looked at him. If you ever use this to rebuild them? Calloway chuckled. I'd be insulted if you didn't try to kill me. He turned, walking toward his car. Enjoy your new lives. And just like that, he was gone. Chapter 30. A New Dawn. The morning was quiet. Ethan and Eleanor sat in a diner, drinking coffee. For the first time in years, they weren't running. Eleanor turned to him. So, where do we go? Ethan smiled. Wherever we want. Daniel leaned back in his chair. I hear Greece is nice this time of year, Eleanor smirked. We're really doing this, huh? Ethan nodded. A new life, a real one, no past, no enemies, just them. Epilogue. Shadows never die. The Greek coastline stretched endlessly before them, waves crashing against the cliffs in a rhythmic, hypnotic pulse. The air smelled of salt and freedom. Ethan leaned against the railing of their secluded villa's terrace, sipping a glass of wine. The weight on his chest, the paranoia, the need to look over his shoulder, had started to fade, but never completely. Eleanor stepped beside him, watching the sunset. You're still thinking about it? Ethan exhaled. Calloway, the files, everything we left behind. Eleanor was silent for a long moment. Then quietly, "You think he'll rebuild Perseus?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He swirled the wine in his glass, watching the crimson liquid catch the fading sunlight. "I think," he said finally, "that men like Calloway don't just walk away from power." Eleanor's grip on the railing tightened. "If he does..." Ethan turned to her, his gaze steady. "Then we burn him down, like we should have done in the first place." She smiled slightly, but there was steel behind it. "Good. I was hoping you'd say that." Elsewhere, Victor Calloway sat in the dimly lit office of a skyscraper that technically didn't exist. The drive sat on his desk, untouched. He didn't need to open it. He already knew what was inside. A man stood across from him, dressed in a black suit, his presence a whisper in the dark. Lucian's replacement. Calloway steepled his fingers. "They think they're free," the man smiled. "Everyone does for a time." Calloway exhaled. "Keep an eye on them. If they step out of line..." A pause, a smile. "Remind them that shadows never die." The end. For now. Did you want a true ending, or do you want to set up a sequel? We could go deeper into Calloway's rise, Ethan and Eleanor's possible return, or even introduce new players. Let me know what you're thinking. Sequel. Shadows never die. Chapter 1. The Letter. The Greek sun was merciless, but the breeze off the Aegean made it bearable. Ethan sat at the cafe, sipping his espresso, watching the slow rhythm of island life. For the first time in years, he wasn't running. Eleanor was inside, haggling with the cafe owner over a bottle of wine she insisted was overpriced. For a moment, Ethan allowed himself to believe it was real. Then he saw the envelope. It was sitting on the table right beside his cup. No one had walked by. No one had left it there, but it was there. His breath slowed. This wasn't over. The envelope was black. No name, no markings, just a single wax seal, a raven's head. Ethan exhaled through his nose. Perseus. His fingers hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in perfect, deliberate strokes. Did you really think it would be that easy? No signature, no threats, just a reminder. Shadows never die. Ethan looked up, scanning the crowd. No one suspicious. No eyes lingering, but he felt it. Someone was watching. Eleanor stepped out of the cafe, holding the wine bottle triumphantly. "I talked him down €3. She stopped when she saw his face. Her expression darkened. "What?" Ethan handed her the letter. She read it, her face unreadable. Then softly she said, "Calloway." Ethan nodded. "He's not done with us." Eleanor looked at the horizon, the sun dipping into the sea. For a long moment, she was silent. Then she whispered, "So we finish it." Chapter 2. The price of freedom Ethan and Eleanor didn't run this time. They packed light. 2 bags, weapons, cash, fake passports. Daniel was waiting for them in a small, run-down apartment in Istanbul, the first safe house. He didn't look surprised when they walked through the door. "Just tired. You got the letter," he said. Ethan nodded. Daniel sighed, rubbing his face. "I told you he wouldn't let it go." Eleanor dropped her bag onto the table. "So what's his play?" Daniel poured himself a whiskey. "Same as always. Control." He met their eyes. "He's keeping us on a leash, reminding us that we only get to live this quiet life if he allows it." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then we cut the leash." Daniel smirked. "I was hoping you'd say that." He reached under the table and pulled out a file. Eleanor opened it. Names, locations, Calloway's new empire. Daniel leaned forward. "You want to finish this? We burn him down. For good." Ethan looked at Eleanor. She didn't hesitate. "Where do we start?" Chapter 3. The first move. Calloway thought he owned them. He was wrong. Their first target was a man named Giorgio Salinas, one of Calloway's top lieutenants, a financier, a power broker, and the man who handled Perseus's offshore accounts. If they could take him out, they could choke the flow of money before Calloway even realized what was happening. Ethan smirked. "Let's break his bank," Eleanor loaded her gun. "And his skull," Daniel grinned. "Now you're speaking my language." They had been running for too long. Now they were the hunters. To be continued. Shadows never die. Chapter 4. Breaking the Bank Istanbul's Grand Bazaar was alive with movement. Tourists haggling over spices, merchants shouting over the scent of roasting meats. Beneath the surface, though, shadows moved unseen. Deals were struck in whispers. Fortunes exchanged hands without a single word spoken, and somewhere in the chaos, Giorgio Salinas was making a mistake. Ethan, Eleanor, and Daniel moved through the market separately, each watching the entrance to a hidden banking house buried. Behind an antique carpet shop, through a discreet earpiece, Daniel muttered, "Target just entered," flanked by 2 bodyguards. Ethan, standing near a stall of leather goods, didn't react. Weapons, armed. But they don't expect a fight. They think Istanbul is neutral ground. Eleanor's voice came next. "Then let's remind them that nowhere is safe." Inside the vault, Salinas sat behind a desk in the back of the banking house, flipping through encrypted ledger books. He had been laundering Calloway's money for years, using offshore networks and false identities. He never saw the attack coming. The power cut out. The emergency lights flickered. Then the first gunshot. Ethan moved fast, a knife to the throat of the first guard before he could react. The second barely had time to reach for his pistol before Eleanor put a bullet between his eyes. Salinas scrambled back, his chair scraping against the marble floor. Wait, you don't have to do this." Ethan grabbed him by the collar, slamming him against the desk. "Calloway sent us a message." His voice was low, dangerous. "Now we're sending one back." Salinas trembled. "Please, I don't know what he—" Eleanor lifted a small USB drive. "We're taking everything." She jammed it into Salinas's encrypted laptop, bypassing firewalls, draining bank codes, account numbers, offshore holdings. Daniel watched the door. "We've got 2 minutes before reinforcements arrive." Ethan pulled Salinas in close. "Tell Calloway." He thought for a moment, then smirked. "The leash is broken." Then he pulled the trigger. Salinas slumped, lifeless. Eleanor yanked the USB out. "We're done here." They vanished into the market before the alarms could even finish ringing. Chapter 5. War begins. 3 hours later, Calloway stood in his private suite in London, staring at the email on his screen. A single video clip. Salinas, dead, a bullet hole between his eyes. Then Ethan's voice, clear and sharp. "Your empire is crumbling." Calloway's fingers tightened into a fist. So they wanted war? So be it. He picked up his phone. "Find them! Kill them! Shadows never die." Chapter 6. The first retaliation. Paris, France. Midnight. The streets were slick with rain, reflecting the golden glow of street lamps. Ethan, Eleanor, and Daniel sat in a quiet cafe near the Seine, sipping coffee from porcelain cups. The USB drive sat between them on the table, a tiny device holding the keys to Calloway's empire. Daniel scrolled through the data on his phone. "We drained 4 of his shell accounts. That's about $200 million off the board." Eleanor stirred her espresso. "It's not just about the money. It's about fear," she smirked. "Calloway knows we can reach into his pockets, and now he'll be looking over his shoulder." Ethan exhaled. "Which means he'll hit back, and right on cue, boom." The cafe windows shattered as the explosion ripped through the building across the street. A fireball erupted, sending debris raining onto the pavement. The force of it sent Ethan and Eleanor sprawling to the ground, ears ringing. Daniel groaned, clutching his side. "Son of a... gunfire!" Silenced rounds hissing through the air. Ethan grabbed Eleanor's hand and pulled her behind an overturned table. He saw them through the smoke. 3 men, tactical gear, suppressors on their pistols, Calloway's hit squad. Chapter 7. The getaway, Ethan drew his pistol and fired. 2 quick shots. One attacker crumpled, blood painting the wet pavement. Eleanor was already moving, knife flashing as she slashed another's throat before he could react. Daniel, bleeding but alive, took cover and reloaded. "We need to move. Now." A black SUV screeched to a stop at the corner, more of Calloway's men pouring out. Ethan grabbed the USB drive from the table, clenched his jaw, and turned to Eleanor. "We split up." She didn't hesitate. "Meet at the train station." Daniel, wincing, nodded. "I'll handle the tail." Ethan and Eleanor bolted down the alley, disappearing into the night. Chapter 8. Calloway's next move, across the city. Calloway sat in a penthouse suite, sipping whiskey as his phone vibrated. A single text from his lead operative. Target escaped. Calloway exhaled slowly. Then he smiled, because it didn't matter. They were still running, and soon they'd run, out of places to hide. Shadows never die. Chapter 9. Underground War, Paris, France. Train station. 3:15 a.m. The train station was nearly empty, save for a few late-night travelers nursing coffee or huddling beneath newspapers. But to Ethan, the stillness felt like a ticking clock. The pounding of his heart was louder than the distant hum of the approaching train. Eleanor was already at the back, scanning the platform, her eyes sharp. She gave him a brief nod. They were on the move, but so was Calloway's shadow. Ethan didn't waste time. He handed her a phone. "Track the accounts. Any change?" She nodded, flipping through the encrypted files. "Not yet, but he knows we have the leverage." She met his gaze. "He's already sending a second wave. You know what that means, right?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "He'll stop at nothing. He'll burn the world to find us." Just then, Daniel appeared out of the shadows, looking worse for wear but grinning. "Got a tail?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "More than one?" Daniel's grin widened. "They brought backup. I counted 5 men on our tracks. One of them's a pro. He's too quiet, too damn good. He's not just a bodyguard, he's someone with a purpose." Eleanor scanned the station again, her fingers brushing the pistol in her holster. "We don't have time for a standoff. The train's coming." Daniel's smile faded. "We don't have time for anything." Ethan turned. To them both. "We take the train. We make them chase us, and then we make them regret it." Chapter 10. The Train. Heist. The train arrived with a screeching halt. The trio moved like ghosts, slipping through the sliding doors into one of the passenger cars. No time to relax, no time to settle in. They had one shot to get to Zurich and get off the grid. Ethan glanced at Eleanor. "Any chance we make it without a fight?" Eleanor's lips curved into a wicked smile. "I've never known you to avoid a fight." They settled into their seats, eyes always moving, every glance toward the windows, every shifting shadow outside the train. They had to be ready. Sure enough, the tension in the air tightened with every passing mile. At the third stop, the train lurched, and Ethan's instincts screamed. They were close. He turned sharply. The doors at the rear of the car slammed open, and the scent of cold steel and sharpened instincts hit him. The hit squad, 5 men, entered with guns drawn. But it wasn't just any hit squad. The one at the front, a tall man in a black suit, was different. His posture was too controlled, his gaze too sharp. This was no mere mercenary. This was Calloway's right hand. Ethan's pulse quickened. The pro. Move. the man said, his voice smooth but lethal. "Give us the drive and we'll let you live." Eleanor stood, eyes glinting like a blade in the dark. "You really think you can just walk in and take from us?" The man smiled, cold. "I'm not here to negotiate." Ethan's eyes never left him. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as he leaned into Eleanor. No time for games. Then, in a flash, it was chaos. Chapter 11. The Final Countdown. The train car erupted into gunfire. Ethan dove to the side, rolling behind a booth as bullets shredded through the air. He barely missed a shot that would have ended him. Eleanor wasn't far behind, moving with the precision of a predator, taking down two of the men with swift, lethal force. Her knife was a blur, slicing through the air, cutting one down before. His hand even touched his sidearm, but the tall man, the pro, wasn't fazed. He wasn't even moving fast. He just was. Every shot fired was calculated, and he never missed. Daniel rolled out from his corner, firing at one of the remaining operatives, but it was the pro who shifted his focus onto him. "No, Daniel," Ethan yelled, but it was too late. The pro's shot rang out. Daniel went down. The sight of Daniel crumpling to the floor sent a surge of cold fury through Ethan. Enough was enough. Ethan stood from his cover, steadying his breathing. With surgical precision, he fired two shots, one to the man's knee, the other to his chest. The pro stumbled but didn't fall. The man chuckled, a dark sound that echoed in Ethan's ears. "Is that all you've got?" Ethan wasn't done. He moved like a shadow, faster than the man could track. Before he could raise his gun again, Ethan slammed into him, taking him to the ground, their bodies crashing against the floor. But just as Ethan got the upper hand, the man smirked. "You're not the only one with secrets." Ethan's world spun as the pro twisted a blade into his side, the sharp sting of metal drawing a hiss of pain from him. But there was no hesitation now. Ethan grabbed his wrist, twisted, and snapped it. With a single strike, he ended the fight, the pro's face contorting in agony before he collapsed. Chapter 12. Not over. Yet. The train screeched to a halt, the sound of approaching sirens filling the air. Ethan staggered to his feet, breath shallow, blood dripping from the wound in his side. He looked at Eleanor, who was already tending to Daniel. He wasn't dead, but he was fading fast. Shadows Never Die, Chapter 13. The Final Play, Zurich, Switzerland. The cold air bit through their jackets as Ethan, Eleanor, and a barely conscious Daniel made their way through the darkened streets. The train had stopped in Zurich after the brutal firefight, and now they had to disappear. The clock was ticking. Every second they stayed out in the open brought them closer to Calloway's reach, but there was a plan. Ethan had always known that taking down Calloway wouldn't be about a single confrontation. It would be about dismantling his empire piece by piece. And now they had the weapon, the USB drive with every detail of Calloway's offshore operations, corrupt political connections, and hidden bank accounts. The money trail that could bring him to his knees. Eleanor helped Daniel keep pace, but the pain was evident in her eyes. She was worried. And if Calloway had men on the ground here too, "We make our stand here," Ethan said, glancing at the dim lights of the Zurich skyline. "If we can get the data to the right people, we don't have to kill him. We can ruin him." Eleanor shook her head. "I've seen men like him fall before. It never ends until they're in the ground." Daniel grunted, his voice weak. "She's right. If we want to walk away, we need to finish this." But Ethan's eyes hardened. "Then we'll finish it." Chapter 14. The web unravels. Ethan had already lined up the pieces. The Swiss authorities weren't an option. Calloway's influence ran too deep. Instead, they had to go to the hackers, the ones with the skills to make sure the entire world saw who Calloway really was. They made contact in a rundown building in Zurich's old district, a tech hub where the most anonymous hands could do the most damage. The place smelled of old electronics and stale coffee. But there was no time for pleasantries. A shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, her face hidden beneath a hoodie. Lana, the hacker who had once taken down corrupt CEOs and washed-up politicians, without anyone ever suspecting her. Ethan didn't waste time with introductions. He handed her the USB. "We need everything on this exposed to the world. Every shady deal, every account, every name." Lana didn't flinch. She plugged the USB into a sleek machine, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Her eyes flickered as the encrypted files began to break down in real time. "This will take some time," she said, her voice low and steady. Eleanor stepped forward, concern etched on her face. "How much time?" Lana glanced at the screen. "If I push it, we can have the initial leaks out in an hour, but Calloway's men, they'll be on us long before that." Daniel shifted uneasily, clutching his wound, but his voice was firm. "We're running out of time." Ethan looked to Eleanor. "We can't wait for the leaks to go public. We need to take out Calloway's stronghold now." Eleanor gave him a nod, understanding the unspoken plan. "We'll give you cover. Get it done." Chapter 15. Into the lion's den, the building that housed Calloway's hidden operations was a fortress. Located on the outskirts of Zurich, it stood like a steel and glass monument to everything Calloway had worked for. But it was also his weakness. The fortress was overrun with security, guards, cameras, biometric access points, you name it. But that didn't matter. Not to them. Ethan, Eleanor, and Daniel snuck through the back alley, well-armed and ready. The rain had picked up, drenching them as they moved swiftly toward the service entrance. "Stay close," Ethan whispered. "We don't engage unless we have to." Eleanor's eyes were sharp. "We will. But if anyone gets in our way—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. They entered through the service door, bypassing the first layer of security. The hum of the building's power system buzzed in their ears, but their footsteps were silent as they moved through the maze of halls. Ethan signaled for them to stop. Ahead, a group of guards patrolled the next hallway, their radios crackling. Eleanor moved first, her steps soundless as she took them down one by one, swift and brutal. They didn't see it coming. The third guard's body crumpled before he could even draw his weapon. Daniel whispered through the comms. "Clear," Ethan nodded. "One more floor." Chapter 16. The confrontation. The top floor was where Calloway's most trusted lieutenants worked, his high-level advisors and enforcers. But Calloway himself wasn't there, not yet. They found the room. It was heavily guarded, but it didn't matter anymore. Inside, they found Cassandra, the woman who had been running Calloway's operations since Salinas' death. She was seated at a massive desk, scanning through documents when she looked up. Her eyes flashed in recognition. "So, you've come for the drive." Ethan didn't waste time. He raised his gun and Cassandra froze. "No," she said, raising her hands. "Not like this. You have no idea what you're up against." Eleanor stepped forward. "We know exactly what we're up against. It's you." Before Cassandra could speak again, shadows never die. Chapter 17. The Reckoning. The tension in the room was suffocating. Calloway stood there, his cold eyes locked on Ethan, Eleanor, and Cassandra, who had backed herself into a corner. The stark silence was broken only by the hum of the building's overhead lights. "You think you've won," Calloway said, his tone dripping with disdain. "That USB? It won't matter." He stepped forward, his confidence radiating through the room like a dark aura. "I have people in places you couldn't even begin to imagine. No one can touch me. Not you, not anyone." Ethan's eyes narrowed. He wasn't buying it. They had come too far to back down now. "You don't get it, Calloway," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the rising tension. This isn't about money anymore. This is about making sure you never hurt anyone again. Eleanor stepped up beside him, her voice ice cold. We're not here to make deals. We're here to end this, and we will. Calloway's eyes flickered with something like amusement. You think you can take me down like this? You're just pawns in a game you don't understand. Chapter 18. The Fall of an Empire Bang. The gunshot rang out, sharp and final, but it wasn't Calloway who fired. Cassandra had moved in the moment Ethan and Eleanor's attention wavered. She wasn't the weak, helpless assistant she had made herself appear to be. The bullet slammed into the wall just inches from Ethan's face. Before she could fire again, Eleanor was on her, moving like a force of nature. Cassandra's eyes widened, with shock as Eleanor's blade shot through the air, piercing her side with deadly precision. The woman crumpled to the ground without a word, blood pooling around her. But Calloway, ever the survivor, had already moved, drawing a pistol from under his coat. You think this will stop me? His eyes glinted with rage as he aimed at Ethan. You should have stayed out of my way. No, Ethan growled, drawing his own weapon in a blur. The two men fired almost simultaneously, but it wasn't a fair fight. Ethan was quicker. He'd always been quicker. The bullet found its mark. Calloway's hand jerked back, the gun falling from his grip as he staggered. He looked down in shock, then back up at Ethan, his face twisted in disbelief. No, he muttered, almost as if trying to convince himself. I can't. But it was too late. Calloway's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor in a heap. Ethan stood over him, panting, but there was no triumph in his eyes, just finality. Eleanor approached, wiping the blood from her blade. It's over. Chapter 19. The Aftermath. The building, once a fortress, now felt like a tomb. Ethan walked away from the body of Calloway without a second glance. The empire that had once been untouchable was now shattered, its leader dead, its operations exposed to the world. But even as the weight of the moment settled over him, there was something nagging at him, pulling at the edges of his mind. Daniel, despite his injuries, had somehow found the strength to rise. He limped toward them, his hand clutching his side, but his expression fierce. Is it done? Ethan nodded. It's done. But even as they exchanged looks of relief, a part of Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite finished. He had dismantled Calloway's empire. He had avenged those who had suffered under his rule. But there was a lingering question that echoed in his mind. What next? Chapter 20. A New Beginning. The rain had finally stopped. The streets of Zurich felt quieter, less oppressive. They had done it, but the road ahead was still uncertain. Eleanor and Daniel had both survived, their wounds treated in a safe house just outside the city. They were still bruised, battered, but alive. And for the first time in a long while, they felt free. The next day, Ethan sat at a small table in a quiet cafe, staring at the USB drive in his hand. It was a piece of history now, a weapon, a key, a death sentence to an empire. He wasn't sure what to do with it next. Eleanor joined him, her eyes scanning the street outside. She sat across from him, folding her arms. So what now? She asked, her voice laced with curiosity. Ethan looked up at her. We disappear. Move on. She raised an eyebrow. You think they'll stop coming for us? They always do, don't they? The ones we leave behind. Ethan smiled slightly, though it didn't reach his eyes. Maybe, but maybe it's time for a new chapter. Daniel, having made a full recovery, walked in. He smiled, his energy already back, a glint of mischief in his eyes. The world's not going to be the same without Calloway, is it? Ethan shook his head. It never is. But then, the sound of a phone vibrating across the table broke the silence. Ethan glanced down. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but something told him it was important. He answered it without hesitation. Ethan. The voice on the other end was low, familiar. I'm not done with you yet. Ethan's blood ran cold. The voice wasn't Calloway's. It was someone new. Shadows never die. Chapter 21. The Return of the Hunter. The phone call hung in the air like an omen. Ethan's grip tightened around the phone, his mind racing, trying to place the voice that had just cut through the quiet like a knife. It wasn't Calloway. It was someone else. Someone who knew too much. Who is this? Ethan's voice was sharp, calm. But the storm inside him was building. The voice on the other end chuckled softly, the sound almost too smooth, too controlled. You don't remember me, do you? Ethan's pulse quickened. No. He knew this. Voice. He had to. But it wasn't right. You were too busy dealing with Calloway to pay attention to the real threat. The words hung heavy, like a warning. I'm the one who's been pulling the strings behind your every move. Ethan's breath caught. The strings? A cold shiver ran down his spine. He knew exactly who this was now, a ghost from his past. The voice laughed again. You thought Calloway was the only one you had to worry about? You were wrong. I've been watching you, Ethan, and now that Calloway is gone, you're mine. Chapter 22. A ghost from the past. Ethan's eyes narrowed, the weight of the realization crashing down on him like a tidal wave. It couldn't be. He quickly silenced the call, the words repeating in his mind like a broken record. You're mine. Eleanor, who had been watching him carefully, leaned in. Who was that? Ethan's eyes were distant, his thoughts racing. A man I thought was dead. Flashback. The Shadows Market had been years ago before the death of Salinas and the rise of Calloway. Victor Hayes, a name that had haunted Ethan's every step. A former CIA operative turned rogue. Victor was the one man Ethan could never bring down. He had been ruthless, calculating, and brilliant. It wasn't just the missions or the shadows he controlled. It was his ability to always stay one step ahead. They had clashed in the past, a game of cat and mouse that had ended with Victor slipping through Ethan's grasp, leaving only a trail of bodies in his wake. Ethan had thought Victor had disappeared after that final confrontation in the jungle, vanished without a trace. But now, it seemed the man had been pulling the strings from the shadows all along. Chapter 23. The chase begins. Again, Ethan didn't have time to process it. He didn't have time for anything. They were on the move. The moment Victor had called, the world shifted again, and they were once more targets in a deadly game. We need to go, Ethan said, urgency thick in his voice. Get the car. We're not safe here. Daniel, still recovering but alert, looked up. Who was that? Did you recognize the voice? Ethan didn't answer at first. Instead, he threw a glance at Eleanor, who was already moving toward the door. Victor. Hayes? Ethan finally said, his voice colder than he intended. He's back, and this time, he's playing for keeps. Eleanor's eyes darkened, the memory of their previous run-ins with the mercenary playing behind her eyes. What does he want? He wants us. He wants everything we have, and he's willing to burn the world to get it. The sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs cut through the tension. Victor's men were already here. Ethan led the way to the door, grabbing the USB from the table. It was time to burn everything to the ground. Chapter 24. The Hunt Begins, the City. Of Zurich was quiet in the early hours of the morning, the streets still wet from the previous night's rain. But as Ethan, Eleanor, and Daniel made their way toward the car, the reality of their situation set in. They were not just fugitives anymore. They were the hunted. Ethan quickly started the engine, peeling away from the curb. As the car sped through the narrow streets, he checked the rearview mirror. He wasn't sure if it was just paranoia, but it felt like someone was always watching. Where are we going? Daniel asked, glancing nervously out of the window. To the safe house, Ethan answered, his mind focused on the road ahead. We need to regroup and plan our next move. But as they approached the outskirts of the city, a black SUV pulled. In behind them, headlights glaring in the mirror. We've got company. Eleanor, already reaching for her weapon, gave him a sharp look. Take a turn. Lose them. Ethan's hands gripped the wheel tighter, a decision forming in his mind. Victor wasn't going to let them go this time. With a swift turn, they veered, off the main road and into the narrow alleyways of Zurich's old district. The black SUV followed, just as relentless. The sound of screeching tires echoed behind them, but Ethan wasn't slowing down. It was a game of cat and mouse now. Chapter 25. The final game, Ethan had a plan. He had to. They needed to lose the tail. He swerved through the winding streets, cutting, through tight corners, trying to get them off balance. But the SUV was still there, persistent, following every move. The alley narrowed, and Ethan glanced to his side. There was an old warehouse. Get ready, he muttered to Eleanor and Daniel. Shadows Never Die, Chapter 27. The Point of No Return. The tension in the warehouse was thick, like a storm waiting to break. The dim light flickered as Victor Hayes stood just a few feet away, his smile still lingering, as though this was just another game. His men flanked him, but there was no sign of fear. They were confident, almost too confident. Ethan, Eleanor, and Daniel held their ground, weapons drawn and ready. But the truth was, Ethan could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on him. Victor Hayes, the man who had haunted his every move, the ghost he thought he'd buried years ago. Now here he was, standing in front of them, alive, unscathed, and still controlling the strings. You still don't get it, do you, Ethan? Victor said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. All of this, everything you've done, every life you've ruined, has led to this moment. You're still playing in my game. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Not anymore. Victor's smile never wavered. Oh, I think you're wrong. You've already lost. And now, the real fun begins. Without warning, Victor snapped his fingers. Chapter 28. The Trap Closes. The sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse, but it wasn't the kind of echo that came from the men standing in front of them. No, this was different. Ethan's instincts kicked in, and he glanced quickly to his left and right. His mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. Where were the rest of his men? Then it hit him. The exit. There was no exit. In an instant, the warehouse doors slammed shut, sealing them in. The dim light flickered once more, casting long, dark shadows over the scene. The sound of clicks and the low hum of machines filled the air. You're trapped, Ethan. Victor's voice echoed, even more sinister now. This is where it ends. Ethan's heart raced, but his hand never wavered from the gun. Eleanor was scanning the area, her eyes sharp. She wouldn't let anyone get the drop on them. Daniel was already moving, looking for a way out, though his injuries still held him back. You think you've won? Ethan said, the bitterness of it seeping into his voice. But this isn't over. You know that, right? Victor's eyes gleamed. Oh, I'm well aware. It's just beginning. Then it happened. With a sudden mechanical whir, a trap door opened in the floor beneath them. No! Daniel shouted as he lunged toward Ethan, trying to pull him back. But it was too late. The ground gave way beneath them. Chapter 29. The Depths of the Game. The fall felt endless. The impact was brutal, slamming them to the cold concrete floor below. Ethan's head spun, and for a moment he was disoriented, unable to tell up from down. His body ached, but there was no time to recover. He pushed himself up, his mind racing. They were in some kind of underground facility, hidden away beneath the warehouse. The walls were concrete, bare except for a few wires running along the ceiling. It felt like a labyrinth. Eleanor was already on her feet, her eyes sharp as she scanned the room. Daniel was slower to rise, clutching his side, but still determined. "Where are we?" Eleanor asked, her voice tense. Ethan quickly checked his surroundings. This was no ordinary facility. The walls were covered in strange symbols like a map of some kind. Large metal doors lined the perimeter, but none of them opened. Victor's voice suddenly crackled through a speaker overhead. "Welcome to my little playground, Ethan. I hope you enjoy the ride. You'll need to use your wits if you want to get out of this one." Ethan's jaw clenched. "What the hell is this place?" Victor's voice came again, this time mocking. "You don't recognize it? This is where it all started for you. The place where I trained you. The place where I made you the man you are today. All you've done, all you've suffered, has led you back here." Ethan froze, a realization dawning on him. This wasn't just a facility, this was the place Victor had created him. He turned to Eleanor, his eyes steely with determination. "This is where it ends." Chapter 30. The final test. They had no choice but to move forward. The air was thick with a sense of dread as they crept deeper into the maze-like corridors of the underground facility. Every turn felt wrong, like the walls were closing in on them. Every shadow felt like it was alive, watching their every move. And then they heard it, the faint sound of footsteps. "We're not alone," Daniel muttered. "Victor has men down here with us." Ethan's hand tightened on his gun. "Stay sharp. We don't get to make mistakes now." The first guard appeared. Around the corner, his rifle raised. He didn't see them coming. Eleanor was faster. She sprang into action, her body a blur as she took the guard down before he could even react. "Move," Ethan said, pushing forward. They continued down the narrow hallway, following the eerie, distant hum of machinery. The sound grew louder as they approached a large steel door at the end of the corridor. "It's him," Ethan whispered. "Victor." Shadows Never Die, Chapter 32. The Return of the Ghost Cassandra. Ethan's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment time seemed to slow. Cassandra. The one person he never expected to see again. The woman who had once been his ally, then his betrayer. The one who had disappeared without a trace after their last mission together, leaving him to deal with the fallout of her actions. Now, here she was, standing before him, her eyes cold, calculating, and full of secrets. "Surprised to see me, Ethan?" Cassandra's voice was smooth, almost playful, as if they were meeting in the middle of a quiet conversation, rather than in a life-or-death showdown. Ethan didn't lower his weapon. His mind raced. He had a million questions, but only one mattered, right now. "Why was she here? What do you want, Cassandra?" His voice was low, steady, her lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "What do I want? That's the real question, isn't it? Maybe I'm here to finish what we started. Or maybe I'm just here to watch the world burn. I haven't quite decided." Ethan's grip tightened on the gun. "You're working for him, aren't you?" His voice was a razor's edge. "Victor, you've been with him this whole time." Cassandra's eyes flickered, a moment of hesitation before the mask returned. "I've always had my own agenda, Ethan. I don't work for anyone. But I've come to realize something. Victor's vision for this world is far more interesting than anything you could ever offer." Eleanor stepped forward, her voice sharp. "You've gone over to his side? You're willing to destroy everything we've worked for?" Cassandra's smile widened. "Destroy? No, Eleanor, I'm just refining it. A little chaos, a little truth, and a lot of power. In the end, it's all just a game. And I plan to win." Ethan's mind raced. He had trusted Cassandra. She had been more than an ally. She had been his confidant, his partner in the field. They had shared secrets, even laughed together during their darkest hours. But now, she stood before him as an enemy, a part of the twisted web Victor had spun around them all. "You've chosen the wrong side, Cassandra," he said, his voice steady but laced with anger. "This ends tonight, one way or another." Chapter 33. The Last Betrayal. The air in the control room thickened with tension as Cassandra's eyes locked with Ethan's, her expression unreadable. "I'm afraid it's already too late for you to stop it, Ethan," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. "You think you're still in control? You never were. None of us were." Before Ethan could respond, a loud beep echoed through. The room and the monitors flickered to life. Victor's face appeared on every screen, his expression gleaming with smug satisfaction. "Ah, Cassandra, I see you've arrived." He paused for a moment, his eyes flickering with something almost fond. "You've done well, my dear. And Ethan, you're still trying to play the hero? How quaint!" Ethan's jaw clenched. "This is over, Victor." Victor's laugh echoed through the room, a hollow, mocking sound. "Over? Oh, Ethan, you really think you've been in control of this game all along? How charming. You've been dancing to my tune since the beginning, just like Cassandra. And now the final phase is about to begin." The lights dimmed. A low hum filled the room, and the screens around them displayed a countdown timer. Only 5 minutes left. Ethan's eyes widened as the realization hit. Victor had set something in motion. Something catastrophic. "What is this?" Eleanor's voice was a whisper of dread. "What are you doing, Victor?" Victor's face twisted into a grin. "It's simple, really. A little gift I've prepared. You've spent years disrupting my plans, but now we'll see who's really in control. The countdown, you see? It's for the detonation of several key facilities around the world, and they all trace back to you, Ethan. Every single one." Ethan's heart stopped. Victor continued, his voice a soft, venomous whisper. "If I can't have this world, then neither can you. The destruction of your precious little network, the people you've worked with, all of it will burn. And you will be left with nothing." Ethan's pulse quickened. "You're insane," Victor shrugged. "Call it what you will. But you're the one who's been playing in my sandbox all this time, Ethan. Now it's my turn to reshape the world." Chapter 34. The Final Choice. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, each second echoing in Ethan's head like a countdown to his doom. He knew what Victor wanted. Chaos, control, a final act of dominance. But Ethan wasn't going to let that happen. Not without a fight. "How do we stop it?" he asked, turning to Cassandra, his voice cold, his eyes hard. "You've been in this game with him. You know how to shut it down." Cassandra's eyes narrowed, the mask of indifference slipping for a brief moment. "You don't get it, do you? It's not about stopping it, Ethan. It's about choosing a side.